The scalding coffee hit Maya's shoulder with a vicious hiss, steam rising from her purple backpack as the liquid soaked through her school uniform. 8 years old and barely 4 feet tall. She stumbled backward, her mouth opening in a silent scream before the pain registered fully. The ceramic mug shattered against the sidewalk, fragments scattering like deadly confetti around her small sneakers. "Get out of my way!" The woman's voice cut through the morning air like broken glass, her face twisted with rage that seemed entirely disproportionate to the moment. "I've had enough of you people thinking you own this neighborhood." Maya's hand flew to her shoulder, tears streaming down her cheeks as the burning sensation spread across her skin. The coffee had been fresh, still steaming from the cup, and now it clung to her uniform like acid. She wanted to run, wanted to scream, but shock held her frozen on the pristine sidewalk of Magnolia Heights, the exclusive subdivision where she'd walked to school every day for 2 years without incident. The woman stood over her, breathing heavily, her manicured hands still clenched into fists. She wore a pristine white tennis outfit that probably cost more than Maya's family spent on groceries in a month. Her blonde hair pulled back in a perfect ponytail that hadn't moved, despite her violent outburst. A small gold pin on her visor caught the morning sunlight, reflecting the HOA logo that Maya had seen on so many official notices delivered to homes throughout the neighborhood. "Karen Whitfield," the woman said, as if her name carried weight that should make Maya cower further. "I'm the vice president of this HOA, and I will not tolerate disruption in my community. Do you understand me?" Maya finally found her voice, though it came out as barely a whisper. "I was just walking to school." The words seemed inadequate against the magnitude of what had just happened, but they were all she could manage as the burning pain intensified. 20 minutes earlier, Maya had kissed her grandmother goodbye and stepped out into what should have been another ordinary Tuesday morning. Grandma Rose had been up since 5 preparing for her double shift at the hospital, her nurse's uniform pressed and ready, her lunch packed in the same worn bag she'd carried for 15 years. She'd moved to Magnolia Heights 2 years ago when Maya's parents died in a car accident, using their modest life insurance payout to secure a small home in what she believed would be a safer neighborhood for her granddaughter. The house on Elm Street was nothing grand, a modest 2-bedroom ranch that sat quietly among the larger colonial and Victorian homes that dominated the subdivision. But it was theirs, paid for in full, with a small front garden where Grandma Rose grew tomatoes and sunflowers that Maya helped tend each weekend. The neighbors had been polite if distant when they first moved in, offering the kind of surface-level pleasantries that suggested acceptance without actual welcome. Maya had adapted to the new school, Hamilton Elementary, with the resilience that children often display when their world shifts beneath their feet. She made friends cautiously, aware that she was one of only 3 black children in her grade, but found comfort in her teachers who praised her reading ability and her careful attention to detail in math class. Her backpack, the source of this morning's confrontation, was a bright purple affair with reinforced straps that carried not just her books, but also her hopes for a future that her grandmother promised would be brighter than the past they'd survived together. The route to school took her through the heart of Magnolia Heights, past houses with perfect lawns and luxury cars parked in circular driveways. She'd grown accustomed to the quiet streets, the absence of traffic that made her grandmother feel safe letting her walk alone, and the predictable rhythm of suburban morning routines. Joggers with expensive headphones, dog walkers with designer leashes, the occasional gardener arriving in trucks to maintain the pristine landscaping that defined the community's character. But this morning felt different from the moment she stepped onto the sidewalk. Karen Whitfield had been standing beside her white BMW SUV, cell phone pressed to her ear, her voice carrying across the morning air with the sharp authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Maya had noticed her before, always impeccably dressed, always moving with purpose, always seeming to survey the neighborhood like a general inspecting troops. "I don't care what the contractor says," Karen had been saying into her phone. "If they can't meet our standards, they don't work in Magnolia Heights. Period." Her eyes had found Maya approaching on the sidewalk, and something in her expression had shifted, hardened into a look of active displeasure that made Maya instinctively slow her pace. The confrontation had started with Karen ending her call and stepping directly into Maya's path. "Excuse me," she'd said, her tone suggesting that excuse was the last thing Maya would receive. "That backpack of yours is completely inappropriate for a residential sidewalk. You're taking up the entire walkway." Maya had looked down at her purple backpack, confused. It was the same size as every other backpack at school. Regulation dimensions that fit within the cubbies and lockers designed for elementary students. "I'm sorry," she'd said, genuinely puzzled by the accusation. "Don't play dumb with me," Karen had snapped, stepping closer until Maya could smell her expensive perfume mixed with the coffee she'd been drinking. "I've been watching you every morning, marching through here like you own the place. Well, let me tell you something. Little girl, this is a private community with standards, and those standards apply to everyone, including visitors." The word visitors had hung in the air like a slap, its implication clear despite the fact that Maya lived 3 blocks away in a house her grandmother owned outright. She'd tried to sidestep around Karen, mumbling another apology, but the woman had moved to block her path again, this time raising the coffee mug in her hand like a weapon. "I said, do you understand me?" Karen had repeated, her voice rising to a shout that echoed off the perfect facades of the surrounding homes. And then, without warning, without any escalation that could have prepared Maya for what came next, she'd hurled the contents of her mug with deliberate, vicious precision. Now, standing in the aftermath with coffee soaking through her uniform and pain radiating across her shoulder, Maya tried to process what had just happened. The physical pain was immediate and undeniable, but the emotional impact cut deeper. She'd been attacked, unprovoked and without mercy, by an adult who should have protected her, or at minimum ignored her entirely. "Clean up this mess," Karen commanded, gesturing at the broken mug with the same authority she might use to direct household staff. "And I better not see you disrupting this neighborhood again. There are proper routes to school that don't require you to parade through private property." The sidewalk wasn't private property. Maya knew that much from social studies class and from overhearing her grandmother's conversations with neighbors about community standards and property rights. But she also knew, with the instinctive wisdom that comes from being different in a world that notices difference, that facts might not matter in this moment. Karen Whitfield wore authority like her tennis outfit, perfectly fitted and displayed for all to see. Maya bent to gather the larger pieces of the broken mug, her shoulders screaming in protest with each movement. The coffee had been hot enough to burn, and she could feel blisters beginning to form beneath her uniform, but she didn't dare complain. Karen stood watching, arms crossed, tapping one perfectly manicured foot against the pristine concrete, as if Maya's pace offended her sensibilities. "Faster!" Karen snapped. "I have a board meeting in 20 minutes, and I won't be late because some child can't clean up after herself." The injustice of the statement hit Maya like a second attack. She hadn't made the mess, hadn't broken the mug, hadn't even been the one holding coffee as a weapon. But she continued gathering fragments because the alternative, standing up to demand fairness, felt impossibly dangerous in the face of Karen's barely contained rage. As Maya worked, other residents began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion or simply following their morning routines. Mrs. Henderson, from the Blue Victorian, paused at her mailbox, her eyes taking in the scene with careful neutrality. Mr. Kowalski, the retired professor who lived on the corner, stopped his morning jog to stare, his expression unreadable behind expensive sunglasses. None of them moved to help. None of them questioned what they were seeing, and their silence felt like complicity in the violence that had just unfolded. Maya finished collecting the ceramic pieces, her hands shaking from pain and adrenaline, small cuts from the broken pottery adding to her injuries. She wrapped the fragments in a tissue from her backpack, unsure what else to do with evidence of her own assault. Karen watched with the satisfied expression of someone who had successfully restored order to her perfect world. "Now," Karen said, her voice returning to the controlled tone she'd used at the beginning of their encounter. "I trust you understand the importance of respecting community standards. Magnolia Heights has worked very hard to maintain its reputation, and we won't allow anyone to compromise that reputation through inappropriate behavior." Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak without crying harder than she already was. The pain in her shoulder had intensified to the point where she worried about permanent damage, but Karen showed no concern for the injuries she'd inflicted. If anything, she seemed pleased with the outcome, as if violence had been a reasonable response to a child walking to school with a backpack that offended her aesthetic sensibilities. "Good," Karen continued. "I suggest you find an alternate route to school that doesn't require you to use our main thoroughfares. There are plenty of back streets that would be more appropriate for someone in your situation." The pause before situation carried volumes of meaning that Maya was too young to fully articulate, but old enough to understand viscerally. It meant she didn't belong, would never belong. Regardless of where she lived, or how well she followed rules, or how carefully she tried to blend into the background of community life. Karen climbed into her BMW, started the engine with unnecessary force, and drove away without a backward glance. Maya stood alone on the sidewalk, clutching her injured shoulder, watching the white SUV disappear around the corner toward the country club, where board meetings apparently took precedence over basic human decency. The other neighbors had retreated into their homes or continued their routines, the morning's violence already dismissed as someone else's problem. Maya looked at her watch and realized she was going to be late for school. But the prospect of walking the remaining 6 blocks with burning pain radiating down her arm felt overwhelming. She needed help, needed an adult who would care about what had happened to her, needed someone to acknowledge that what Karen Whitfield had done was wrong. She pulled out the cell phone her grandmother had given her for emergencies, her fingers fumbling with the numbers as tears blurred her vision. Grandma Rose answered on the second ring, her voice immediately shifting to alarm when she heard Maya crying. "Baby, what's wrong? Are you hurt?" "A lady threw coffee on me," Maya managed between sobs. "She said I don't belong here. She said my backpack was too big. Grandma, it hurts so bad." Grandma Rose didn't ask questions that could wait, didn't demand details that would delay urgent care. "Stay exactly where you are, baby. Don't move. Don't talk to anyone else. I'm calling 911 and I'm coming to get you right now." Maya sank onto the curb, her backpack beside her. The morning sun growing warmer as shock began to wear off, and the full magnitude of her pain became clear. The coffee had soaked through to her skin in multiple places, and she could see red marks on her arm, where the liquid had splashed beyond her shoulder. Each breath hurt. Each movement sent fresh waves of agony through her small body, and she began to worry that the damage might be permanent. The ambulance arrived first, its sirens cutting through the suburban quiet like an alarm that couldn't be ignored. Paramedics knelt beside Maya with practiced efficiency, cutting away portions of her uniform to assess the burns, their voices gentle but urgent as they worked to stabilize her condition. The lead paramedic, a middle-aged black woman whose name tag read Johnson, spoke to Maya with the kind of calm authority that made her feel safe for the first time since the attack. "You're going to be okay, sweetheart," Johnson said as she applied cooling gel to the worst of the burns. "These are second-degree burns, but they're treatable. We're going to take good care of you." Grandma Rose arrived as the paramedics were loading Maya into the ambulance, her face a mask of controlled fury that Maya had never seen before. She climbed in beside the stretcher, taking Maya's uninjured hand in both of hers, her voice steady despite the rage that radiated from every line of her body. "Tell me exactly what happened, baby. Every word, every detail. Can you do that for me?" Maya recounted the confrontation as the ambulance rushed toward the hospital, her voice growing stronger as she described Karen's actions and words. Grandma Rose listened without interruption, her expression growing darker with each detail. Her free hand clenched into a fist that trembled with suppressed emotion. "She threw hot coffee on a child," Grandma Rose said to the paramedic, her voice carrying 15 years of experience dealing with hospital emergencies. "Deliberately. Because she didn't like the size of her backpack." Johnson nodded grimly. "We see a lot of things in this job, ma'am. But this is assault on a minor. The police are meeting us at the hospital." At the emergency room, Maya was wheeled into a treatment bay where doctors began the careful process of cleaning and dressing her burns. The pain medication they administered brought blessed relief, but it couldn't touch the emotional trauma of what she'd experienced. A social worker arrived to document her account of the incident, followed by a police officer whose questions were thorough but gentle, designed to build a case without re-traumatizing the victim. Grandma Rose stepped into the hallway to make phone calls, her voice carrying back into the treatment room in fragments that Maya couldn't quite piece together, but that sounded official and urgent. She heard mentions of lawyers and federal agencies, words that seemed too important for their small family crisis, but that apparently applied nonetheless. When Grandma Rose returned, she was accompanied by a tall man in an expensive suit, whose presence seemed to command immediate attention from the hospital staff. He introduced himself to Maya with the kind of warm smile that reached his eyes, extending his hand for a gentle shake that accommodated her bandaged shoulder. "Hello, Maya. I'm your Uncle Marcus. Your grandmother called me about what happened to you this morning." Maya stared at him in confusion. She'd never heard of Uncle Marcus, had no memory of him from family gatherings or holiday celebrations. Grandma Rose sat beside her bed, taking her uninjured hand again, her expression softer now, but still carrying that underlying steel that had emerged after the attack. "Marcus is my brother's son," Grandma Rose explained. "He's been working in Washington, D.C., for the Justice Department. I called him because what happened to you today isn't just assault, baby. It's a hate crime." Uncle Marcus nodded, pulling a chair closer to Maya's bed, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to courtrooms and high-stakes legal battles. "Maya, I want you to know that what happened to you this morning was not only wrong, it was illegal under federal law. The woman who hurt you committed a crime that we take very seriously." Maya looked between her grandmother and this uncle she'd never known existed, trying to process the idea that her painful morning had implications beyond her own injuries. "She said I didn't belong in the neighborhood. She said I was disrupting the community." "None of that justifies what she did to you," Uncle Marcus said firmly. "You have every right to walk on public sidewalks, to go to school, to exist in your own neighborhood without being attacked. And Karen Whitfield is about to learn that there are serious consequences for people who think they can hurt children because of the color of their skin." The phrase hung in the air like a revelation Maya had understood instinctively, but had never heard articulated so clearly. The color of her skin. It wasn't about her backpack, or her disruption of community standards, or any of the justifications Karen had offered. It was about race, about power, about an adult woman who believed she had the right to assault a child because that child was black, and therefore, in her mind, less deserving of basic human dignity. Over the next few hours, as Maya's burns were treated and documented, Uncle Marcus began building a case that would transform their family tragedy into a federal matter. He made phone calls to colleagues in the Civil Rights Division, coordinated with local police to ensure evidence was properly preserved, and arranged for additional medical documentation that would support the criminal charges he intended to pursue. Maya learned that Uncle Marcus was not just any Justice Department lawyer, but a federal prosecutor who specialized in hate crimes and civil rights violations. His presence in Washington, D.C., his connections within the federal legal system, and his expertise in exactly the kind of case that Karen Whitfield had created for herself meant that the woman who'd attacked an 8-year-old girl on her way to school was about to face the full weight of federal justice. "Grandma," Maya said as they prepared to leave the hospital, her shoulder wrapped in professional bandaging that would need to be changed daily for weeks. "Why didn't you ever tell me about Uncle Marcus?" Grandma Rose's expression softened, and for the first time that day, Maya saw her smile. "He's been working on some very important cases, baby. Cases that couldn't be talked about, even within the family. But when someone hurts my granddaughter, when someone commits a federal crime against our family, then it's time for Uncle Marcus to come home." That evening, as Maya rested in her own bed with pain medication and antibiotics nearby, Uncle Marcus sat in their small living room coordinating with federal agents and local prosecutors to build a case against Karen Whitfield that would serve as both justice for Maya and a deterrent to others who might consider similar acts of violence. The investigation moved with surprising speed. Security cameras from neighboring homes had captured portions of the incident, including Karen's deliberate decision to throw hot coffee at a child who posed no threat. Witnesses who had initially remained silent began coming forward, some admitting they'd seen Karen make racist comments about Maya and her family in previous HOA meetings. By Thursday, news of the federal investigation had spread throughout Magnolia Heights like wildfire. The monthly HOA meeting, normally a quiet affair discussing landscaping contracts and pool maintenance, had been transformed into an emergency session where residents would confront the reality that their vice president was facing federal hate crime charges. Maya didn't attend the meeting, but Uncle Marcus did, accompanied by 2 federal agents, whose presence sent shockwaves through the community leadership. Karen Whitfield arrived in the same white BMW she'd driven away from the scene of her crime, her tennis outfit replaced by a conservative business suit that couldn't disguise the fear in her eyes when she saw federal law enforcement waiting for her. The meeting room at the community center filled beyond capacity. Residents who had never shown interest in HOA politics, suddenly eager to understand how their neighborhood had become the center of a federal hate crime investigation. Maya's neighbors, people who had offered polite smiles and surface-level pleasantries for 2 years, now found themselves forced to confront their own complicity in creating an environment where such violence could occur. HOA President Gerald Morrison called the meeting to order with obvious reluctance, his usual confidence replaced by the nervous energy of someone who understood that every word would be scrutinized by federal investigators. "We're here tonight to address the serious allegations against our Vice President, Karen Whitfield, and to discuss the future of our community leadership." Karen rose from her seat, her lawyer beside her, her face pale, but her voice still carrying traces of the authority she'd wielded so brutally against Maya. "I want to make it clear that the incident with the child has been blown completely out of proportion. I was simply trying to maintain community standards when an unfortunate accident occurred." Uncle Marcus stood immediately, his federal credentials giving him an authority that silenced the murmur of agreement that had begun to rise from some residents. Ms. Whitfield, you are under federal investigation for committing a hate crime against my 8-year-old niece. There was no accident. You deliberately threw scalding coffee at a child because she is black, and you believed you had the right to assault her for walking on a public sidewalk. The room erupted in chaos, voices raised in shock, anger, and disbelief. Some residents defended Karen, insisting they'd never seen evidence of racism in her leadership. Others began sharing stories they'd previously kept quiet. Incidents where Karen had made inappropriate comments about the few Black and Hispanic families in the neighborhood. Suggestions that certain people didn't understand community values or belong in exclusive subdivisions. Mrs. Henderson, the woman who had watched Maya clean up broken pottery without offering help, stood with tears in her eyes. I saw what happened Tuesday morning. I saw Karen throw that coffee at a little girl, and I did nothing. I walked back into my house and pretended it wasn't my business. I'm ashamed of myself, and I'm ashamed of this community. Her confession opened floodgates of guilt and revelation. Other residents began admitting what they'd witnessed, what they'd ignored, how they'd allowed Karen's increasingly aggressive behavior toward minority families to continue unchecked because it didn't directly affect their own comfort or property values. Mr. Kowalski, the retired professor who had paused his jog to watch Maya's humiliation, removed his expensive sunglasses and addressed the room with the gravity of someone delivering a lecture on moral philosophy. I have spent my career teaching about civil rights, about the importance of standing up to injustice, about the responsibility of bystanders to protect the vulnerable. Tuesday morning, I failed every principle I've ever taught. I watched a child being assaulted, and I did nothing because it was easier to assume it wasn't my problem. Uncle Marcus listened to the confessions and revelations with the practiced attention of a prosecutor building a case. But his primary focus remained on ensuring justice for his niece. The federal investigation will proceed regardless of community sentiments, he announced when the room quieted. Karen Whitfield committed a felony hate crime that carries serious federal penalties. She will face those charges whether this community supports her or condemns her. Karen's lawyer whispered urgently in her ear, but she shook her head and rose again, her composure finally cracking under the weight of federal scrutiny and community condemnation. You people don't understand what it's like to maintain standards in a community like this. Every decision I've made has been about protecting property values and preserving the character that makes Magnolia Heights special. By attacking children. The question came from Maria Santos, one of the Hispanic mothers whom Karen had previously targeted with complaints about her children playing too loudly in their own backyard. By making families feel unwelcome in their own neighborhood. By teaching our children that their skin color makes them targets for violence. The meeting continued past midnight, residents grappling with revelations about their community and their own behavior that many had never been forced to confront. By the time it ended, Karen Whitfield had been removed from all HOA positions, banned from community leadership, and faced a united front of neighbors who finally understood the difference between maintaining standards and perpetuating hatred. Federal charges were filed the following week. Karen Whitfield was indicted on federal hate crime charges, carrying potential sentences of up to 10 years in prison and substantial financial penalties. The local district attorney added state charges of assault and battery against a minor, child endangerment, and reckless endangerment, creating a legal situation where Karen faced both federal and state prosecution for her actions against Maya. The case attracted national media attention, with civil rights organizations using Maya's story to highlight the ongoing reality of racial violence in American communities. News crews camped outside Magnolia Heights, interviewing residents about the culture that had enabled Karen's behavior and the changes they plan to implement to prevent future incidents. Maya returned to school the following Monday, Her bandaged shoulder drawing concerned questions from teachers and classmates who had heard about her attack. But she also returned to a transformed neighborhood where residents now made eye contact when she passed. Where Mrs. Henderson waved from her garden, and Mr. Kowalski stopped his morning jogs to check on her healing progress. The community center established a diversity and inclusion committee charged with reviewing HOA policies and practices that might discriminate against minority residents. They implemented sensitivity training for all board members and created channels for residents to report incidents of harassment or discrimination without fear of retaliation. Grandma Rose found herself invited to join the newly formed committee, her nursing experience and natural leadership making her a valuable voice in reshaping community standards. She accepted the position with the same quiet determination she brought to everything else, viewing it as both an opportunity to prevent other children from experiencing what Maya had endured and a way to honor her granddaughter's courage in the face of hatred. Uncle Marcus remained in town through the legal proceedings, building relationships with his niece and sister-in-law that had been neglected during his years of federal service. Maya discovered that her uncle's expertise extended beyond courtroom advocacy to chess, mathematics, and storytelling, and their evening games became a source of healing and connection that helped her process the trauma of her attack. Karen Whitfield's trial became a landmark case in federal hate crime prosecution, with Uncle Marcus leading a legal team that methodically demonstrated how her actions constituted deliberate racial violence, rather than accidental harm or community enforcement. Security footage, witness testimony, and Karen's own recorded statements at HOA meetings created an overwhelming case that resulted in her conviction on all federal charges. The sentencing hearing drew civil rights leaders from across the country, who spoke about the importance of holding perpetrators accountable for racial violence, and the broader message that federal prosecution sent to communities where such violence had been tolerated or ignored. Maya, now 9 years old and fully healed from her physical injuries, testified about the impact of the attack on her sense of safety and belonging. "I used to love walking to school," she told the federal judge, her voice steady despite the gravity of the courtroom setting. "I liked seeing the pretty houses and the flowers in people's yards. After Ms. Whitfield hurt me, I was scared to leave my house. I thought other people might hurt me too, just because of how I look." The judge sentenced Karen Whitfield to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised probation, and ordered her to pay substantial restitution to Maya's family for medical expenses and emotional damages. The sentence sent shockwaves through communities across the country where similar incidents had been dismissed as isolated conflicts rather than recognized as federal crimes deserving serious prosecution. Maya's story became part of educational curricula about civil rights and the ongoing struggle for racial equality in America. Schools invited her and Uncle Marcus to speak about their experience, transforming her trauma into a teaching tool that helped other children understand both the reality of racism and the importance of standing up against injustice. The Magnolia Heights community underwent its own transformation, with property values actually increasing as the neighborhood gained a reputation for progressive leadership and inclusive policies. The Diversity and Inclusion Committee's work attracted new residents who valued the community's commitment to equality, creating a genuine integration that had never existed under Karen's leadership. 2 years after the attack, Maya was honored at a ceremony recognizing young people who had shown exceptional courage in the face of adversity. The award, presented by the local NAACP chapter, cited her bravery in testifying against her attacker and her work with other children who had experienced racial violence. At the ceremony, Maya spoke about the importance of community support in healing from trauma and the difference between individual courage and collective responsibility. "I couldn't have stood up to Ms. "Whitfield by myself," she said, reading from notes she'd prepared with Uncle Marcus's help. "But when my family and my neighbors, and even people I didn't know, decided to stand up with me, then justice became possible." Grandma Rose watched from the audience, tears of pride streaming down her face as she saw her granddaughter transform pain into purpose, trauma into advocacy. The little girl who had been attacked for walking to school with a purple backpack had become a young voice for justice, speaking truth to power with the support of a community that had learned to live up to its better angels. Uncle Marcus returned to Washington, D.C., carrying with him not only professional satisfaction from a successful prosecution, but also personal fulfillment from reconnecting with family and witnessing Maya's remarkable resilience. He continued his work in the Civil Rights Division with renewed energy, knowing that federal hate crime laws could make real differences in real lives when applied with skill and determination. Karen Whitfield began serving her federal sentence at a minimum security facility, where she was required to participate in programs addressing racial bias and community responsibility. Her perfect house in Magnolia Heights was sold to pay restitution and legal fees, purchased by a young black family whose children now play in the same yards where Karen had once demanded conformity to her vision of community standards. Maya continued walking to school each morning, her route unchanged from the path that had led to her attack. But now, her journey took her past neighbors who waved from their windows, gardens where multiple languages could be heard as families tended their plants, and a community center that displayed a plaque commemorating her courage and the transformation it had sparked. The purple backpack that had once offended Karen Whitfield's sense of appropriate community standards now carried books about civil rights leaders, mathematics assignments that challenged Maya's growing intellect, and letters from children across the country who had heard her story and found inspiration in her resilience. It remained perfectly sized for elementary school regulations and for the dreams of a girl who had learned that justice was possible when communities chose courage over comfort. On quiet mornings when Maya walked past the spot where Karen had attacked her, she sometimes paused to remember not the pain of that day, but the strength she had discovered in its aftermath. The burned shoulder had healed completely, leaving only the faintest scar that served as a reminder of what she had survived, rather than what had been done to her. The neighborhood around her bustled with the sounds of genuine community, children of all backgrounds playing together, parents sharing resources and support, a community that had learned to see diversity as strength rather than threat. Maya's trauma had become a catalyst for transformation that extended far beyond her own healing, creating ripples of change that would protect future generations from the hatred she had faced. As she reached Hamilton Elementary each morning, Maya carried with her not just books and supplies, but also the knowledge that one girl's courage, supported by family love and community commitment, could challenge systems of oppression and create space for justice to flourish. Her purple backpack had become a symbol of resistance, a reminder that even the smallest acts of existing, while different, could become powerful statements about the right to belong, to be safe, and to walk freely through the world without fear of violence based on the color of one's skin. The story of Maya's attack and the federal prosecution that followed became a landmark case study in how communities could confront racial violence, support victims of hate crimes, and transform tragedy into positive change. But for Maya herself, it remained simply the story of a morning when she learned that hatred existed in the world, and the years that followed when she discovered that love, justice, and community solidarity were more powerful forces than the fear that had tried to silence her voice and dim her light.